अभी का फ्रंटलाइन है जुवेनाइल जस्टिस का, so I'll be dealing with that, and that is exactly what I plan to do. So I'll be dealing with it in so many different ways, in the sense that काफ़ी कुछ है कि जो उसके बारे में कहा जा सकता है, काफ़ी कुछ है जो उसके बारे में कहना ज़रूरी है, और काफ़ी कुछ है जो कहने के बाद भी वैसे ही रहेगा, in the sense that despite everything would be said, there would be a lot which is yet unsaid. Let's try making sense of it, and let's try putting something into it in terms of what exactly is this whole idea all about. I mean, what is it intended, what are they doing, and so on and so forth. Okay. The complete thing is titled as the Juvenile Justice, आणि त्याला ब्रॅकेटमध्ये काहीतरी आहे. It's called as Care and Protection of Children Bill. It was passed by the Lok Sabha on the 7th of May this year itself, and it was passed by the Rajya Sabha on the 22nd of December, which was the immediate reason for this entire crisis. कि ये जो अभी का पूरा डिस्कशन हुआ, या ये जो अभी का पूरा recent controversy हुआ, उसका immediate backdrop जो था was the Rajya Sabha passing it on the 22nd of December. Okay. So the Parliament's job in terms of dealing with it is done. Now this goes to the President for his assent, and if the President assents to it, then this is done. Then this becomes a law. And technically speaking, now there is no reason why the President should say no to it, for a simple reason because both houses of Parliament have passed it. So given the fact कि दोनों houses ने pass किया है, अभी ऐसा कोई technical reason नहीं कि जिसकी वजह से President उसको ना बोल सकता है. Legal बहुत सारे reasons हैं कि जिसकी वजह से ये problem में जाएगा. In the sense कि like immediately the minute it is passed, it might possibly be challenged in the Supreme Court, and there are people who are like preparing for this challenge कि ये Supreme Court में challenge होना चाहिए और इसका validity जो है वो question होना चाहिए. The reason being, the Supreme Court of India in the past has said something in the connection with a couple of pieces of legislation, कि a couple of cases, sorry, not pieces of legislation, a couple of cases, कि Juvenile Justice Act 2000 जो है is something that should fairly hold, and there's no reason why it should be challenged or changed. So अभी ये देखना ज़रूरी होगा कि once this becomes an act, once this becomes a law all by itself, after the President assenting to it, how would the Supreme Court look at it? Though, as we all know, Supreme Court कोई एक ऐसी चीज़ नहीं है कि जिसमें आप consistency ढूंढ लो, क्योंकि उनका मानना ये है कि consistency गधों का लक्षण है. So one doesn't know. The Supreme Court of India might uphold all of this, even if it gets challenged, by saying this that कि Parliament is well within its ambit to change it. And there's no reason why Parliament should not change it, or there's no reason why there should be no change entertained to it. कि Parliament का काम law बनाना है और Parliament ने अपना काम किया है. तो अगर Parliament ने अपना काम किया है, तो शायद कोर्ट पूरी तरह से इससे एक तरह से अपना पल्ला झाड़ ले by saying कि we agree with what has been done. Okay. Though in the past, and in the very recent past, मतलब as recent as 2013. The Supreme Court of India had upheld in one of these cases which had gone to it the constitutional validity of something called as the Juvenile Justice Act of 2000. और 2000 वाले एक्ट का एक स्पेशलिटी ये था कि 2000 वाला एक्ट increased it from 16 to 18. That is like कि आपका एज क्या होना चाहिए अगर आपने कोई सीरियस क्राइम किया है कि जिस एज पे आपको प्रोसिक्यूट किया जा सकता है. और ये 15 वाला जो कानून है reduces it and brings it back from 18 to 16. So now what it says is कि, and it's dicey in the sense that the wording of the act is quite dicey. I don't know whether I would exactly get the wording. But okay, let's see. I might come to it. तो dicey अशासाठी आहे. And there's a lot in it which has not been well defined. A lot in it which has not at all been defined in terms of एक law का जो definition होना चाहिए, उसमें आप use ends नहीं छोड़ सकते, उसमें आप ऐसी चीजें नहीं कर सकते हो कि जिसमें you leave it for the authorities implementing the law to interpret the law. And that is exactly what this piece of legislation does. It talks of something called as heinous crimes. Now there's a category of things which is called as heinous crimes. अब ये heinous crimes वाला जो idea है, okay, this is good, I have it. This is what the Child and Women Welfare Minister, who is a Mahan Atma hai, and I'll very soon come to her because she is for me the villain of the entire piece. A woman as horrible as that was possibly never made is my personal reading of her as far as her personal piloting of this bill is concerned. तो अब जैसे तमाम किस्म की चीज़ों के लिए लीडरशिप नाम की चीज़ की बहुत ज़रूरत होती है, आइडिया कितना भी नोबल इंटेंशन क्यों ना हो, to put it into practice you need something that is called as leadership. And I personally hold her responsible for everything. Had she not been the one who was moving her brains behind all of this, शायद ये जिस तरह से पास हुआ उस तरह से कभी पास नहीं होता. So for me she is like complete. She is solely responsible for whatever has happened. This is what she says on the floor of the House. Union Minister for Women and Child Development Menka Gandhi told the Rajya Sabha that the new law would enable sending a juvenile to jail, and this is what she says, and it begins with its quotes: if it is perceived that he committed a heinous crime with an adult mind. Okay, what it means, it does not at all mean that a 16-year-old has to go to jail. This is all that she is saying. मेरा कुछ नहीं है. So ये पूरा quotes में है. Suppose a child commits a crime in the heinous category, which is murder, rape, some kinds of arson, and there are two more categories which have been listed. So Menka Gandhi made it seem on the floor of the House कि it's only 5 categories for which they would be prosecuted. पर ये heinous crimes नाम का जो category है ना, कि जिसमें प्रावधान है of minimum of 7 years of imprisonment, is under the IPC used for 43 crimes. So the bill says कि heinous crimes के लिए this is what should be done. कि they should be prosecuted even when they are 16 years of age, and if they have committed this crime with what is called as an adult mind. आता ये बहुत problematic है because mind नाम का category बहुत problematic है. So ये adult mind क्या होता है is something that has been left open to all manner of interpretation on the ground by the legal enforcement agencies कि आप decide करो कि adult mind नाम का चीज़ क्या है. Okay, तो इसके लिए बहुत strong problem ये है. On the floor of the House, she made it seem कि it's just 5 crimes. It's nothing more than that. But if you look at the IPC, which would be used when you are doing this business, there are 43 crimes which attract something called as 7 years of minimum imprisonment. So heinous का idea under the IPC is much more comprehensive than what Menka Gandhi made it sound in the Rajya Sabha. So in the Rajya Sabha, she was like कि नहीं ये छोटा चीज़ है, ये 5-6 problems है कि जिसके लिए इनको इस तरह से prosecute किया जाएगा, and people, members of the House need not be worried about. But then if you look at the IPC provisions are quite clear about it. There are 43 crimes for which minimum 7 years can be attracted. So that is one problem which never gets resolved. So Madam says, and I quote, suppose a child commits a crime in the heinous category, which is murder, rape, some kinds of arson. Suppose he commits that, he will then go, if he is under 18, before a juvenile justice board. They will decide whether he committed the crime with an adult mind or a childish mind. Unquote. Juvenile Justice Board linchpin है इस act के implementation का. Everything hinges on something called as the Juvenile Justice Board, जिसका complete responsibility है ये तय करना कि ये जो बंदा आपके सामने खड़ा है, and ये बंदा is what has to be used for a simple reason because of one very interesting thing. If we look at the data which has been provided by the National Crime Record Bureau for 2014, girls constitute 2.3% of the offenders and boys constitute 97.6% of juvenile offenders. So I don't see any reason why one should be using a gender neutral term when one is talking about this. A juvenile offender in the Indian context invariably is a he, because it's just 2.3% that you're talking about in the category called as girls. So given the fact that 97% offenders आपके males है, तो juvenile offender का gender आपकी case में he है. Okay, so it's not wrong when I use that word which says कि he. So ये जो बंदा है जो आपके सामने खड़ा है, ये इसने crime commit किया है. अब आपको ये तय करना है कि इसका crime जो है, does it merit him being tried as an adult? Or does it merit him being tried and him being taken into custody by the JJB and him be prescribed a certain range of things by the JJB? अब प्रॉब्लम इस एक्ट का ये है, द एक्ट डज नॉट मेंशन हाउ वुड द जेजेबी बी कॉन्स्टिट्यूटेड. सो देयर इज नथिंग इन द एक्ट व्हिच सेज कि जुवेनाइल जस्टिस बोर्ड्स कॉन्स्टिट्यूट किस तरह से किए जाएंगे, कौन लोग होंगे कि जो जुवेनाइल जस्टिस बोर्ड के मेंबर्स बनेंगे, क्या क्राइटेरिया है, क्या क्वालिफिकेशंस है इन लोगों के जेजेबी के मेंबर्स बनने का. अब प्रॉब्लम ये है कि पुराना वाला जो सिस्टम था, एवरीवन न्यू हाउ वर पीपल अपॉइंटेड इन दैट. The new thing needs to be mentioned for a simple reason because you have amended it and you have brought it down from 18 to 16. So अगर आप एक पूरा नया कैटेगरी ऑफ ऑफेंडर्स इसमें ला रहे हो कि जिनका एज ग्रुप आप कह रहे हो कि मिनिमम 16 हो सकता है for these purposes, so it definitely means that what has to be done in this case is you have got to mention as to who are going to form the JJB. If people who are going to form the JJB have an idea of justice which is retributive, तो फिर तो काम खत्म ही हो गया. यू नो फॉर शुअर दैट द चाइल्ड इज गोइंग टू बी प्रॉसिक्यूटेड. की जर त्यांची मानसिकता ही अशी असणार आहे की अहो सर मला माहित नाही ही मुलं आहेत ना अशीच वाह्यात असतात आणि ह्यांच्या बाबतीत ना हे असंच करणं बरोबर आहे की यांना अशाच पद्धतीने तुम्ही प्रॉसिक्यूट केलं पाहिजे. म्हणजे काय करायला पाहिजे तर यू शुड सेंड देम टू एन अडल्ट प्रिझन फॉर द क्राइम दैट दे आर कमिटेड फॉर व्हाट 7 years 6 years जो भी है. तो उस केस में प्रॉब्लम ये बन जाता है कि आपने ये किस बेसिस पे तय किया. ये बहुत ही सब्जेक्टिव मामला है कि हाउ डू यू डिसाइड whether the mind under which he has done this is subjective or whether the mind is an adult mind or a childish mind. Okay, that is nowhere defined कि what exactly would one mean by an adult mind or what exactly would one mean by a childish mind. So she is not explaining that, but there is something wherein she does talk of, just give me half a minute to come, on the two avenues for the same offense, that is a childish mind and an adult mind. She said if the board decides that the child did not commit the crime with a childlike mind and perceived it was a thought out crime like an adult, it would not hear his case but transfer it for his trial as an adult. Okay, this is how she explains it. A, coming to the provisions which the minister sought to simplify, section 15(1) of the JJ Abhi ka jo act hai December wala states in case of a heinous offence alleged to have been committed by a child who has completed or is above the age of 16 years, the board shall conduct a preliminary assessment with regard to his mental and physical capacity to commit such offence, ability to understand the consequences of the offence and the circumstances in which he allegedly committed the offence, and may pass an order in accordance with the provisions of the subsection 3 of section 18 of the same bill. This subsection reads, where the board after the preliminary assessment under section 15 passes an order that there is a need for the trial of the said child as an adult, then the board may order the transfer of the trial of the case to the children's court, sessions court, having jurisdiction to try such offences. Okay. And then madam says, and I quote, the minister explained the position by stating that if a child kills his father who used to torture his mother, it would be treated as a crime committed with a childlike mind. The decisive factor admittedly would be facts yet to be verified or established by the prosecution during trial. पर होना ये है कि even before he goes trial, लेबल तो लगने वाला है कि भाई आप एक एडल्ट क्रिमिनल हो या नहीं हो. सो वो जो क्रिमिनल जस्टिस का एकदम फाउंडेशनल किस्म का अंडरस्टैंडिंग है कि देयर इज समथिंग कॉल्ड एज प्रिज्यूम्ड इनोसेंट अंटिल प्रूवन गिल्टी. दिस गोज आउट फॉर अ टॉस ओवर यू. मामला आपने गुनाह किया है, तय बस इतना करना है कि आपको एडल्ट के तौर पे ट्राई करना है या आपको चाइल्ड के तौर पे ट्राई करना है. And that is exactly what is extremely disturbing about this act. Completely disturbing. You, on the basis of an allegation, can say कि he is a criminal. उसके बाद the JJB comes into play just one simple role कि decide whether ये adult criminal के तौर पे ट्राई होगा या child criminal के तौर पे ट्राई. पर criminal तो आप हो, बात सही है. तो crime का जो dispensing है criminal jurisprudence में कि भाई you are presumed guilty till you are not proven otherwise. You are presumed innocent till you are not proven otherwise. That is gone out for a toss. आणि या असे धंदे जे आहेत ना हे ह्यांनाच सुचो, हे बाकी कुणाला सुचणं शक्य नाही. आता we all know the situation in which this was done, and something that I did hint at in one of my earlier sessions when I said this, that problem क्या हुआ था कि ये 2012 वाला मामला है जिसमें there's this young offender who committed the crime when he was 17 years of age. Article 20 of the Constitution is very clear about this कि आपको prosecute किया जाएगा in accordance with the law which was in force at the time when you committed the crime. सही है कि आपको दूसरा किसी भी चीज में ट्राई नहीं करना है, आपको उसी लॉ के प्रोविजन में ट्राई करना है जो प्रोविजन एक्सटेंडेबल है कि जिस वक्त आपने एक क्राइम कमिट किया. Now this child committed a crime, he was tried for it, he was sentenced for it. The provision under the law at that point of time was that he would be put into jail for 3 years. He has completed his term and he was about to be released in the month of December 2015. And that's the time when everyone gets into action with some sort of what seems to be a manufactured crisis. The word manufactured is what I can use, and if Arun Jaitley lets me use it, by saying कि देखो ये लड़का अब छूटने वाला है, उसके बाकी जो साथी है they have been punished with something called as death. Okay, one of them is already dead because he committed suicide. बाकी सब लोगों को कैपिटल पनिशमेंट डिलीवर हो चुका है and their appeals are pending. और ये जो लड़का है, he is the only person who, as the media portrayed him, was the most vicious one as far as the actual conduct of the crime was concerned, and he would be the one who would walk out free. And this is like, for them who talked about this, a certain sort of grave injustice कि the most vicious offender is walking free merely on account of the fact that he was underage at the point of time at which the crime was committed. बाकी तमाम बंदे जो है have been punished with capital punishment. ये एक ही बंदा है जो बाहर निकल जाएगा क्योंकि ये अंडरएज था. तो जिसका मतलब ये है कि आपका लॉ में एक फ्लॉ है जो फिक्स करने का जरूरत है. तो जिसके लिए ये कहा गया कि इस फ्लॉ को फिक्स करने का तरीका ये है कि वी नाउ गेट इनटू वन मोर लॉ which will go about amending all of this and which can bring this down to 16. So if it goes down to 16, now look at the 16 wala game. 16 आता कहाँ से? When he committed the crime he was 17, on the verge of becoming 18. तो अगर उस वक्त लॉ ये होता कि भाई 16 के एज पे ही आपको क्रिमिनल डिक्लेयर किया जा सकता है, you could definitely have it been tried as an adult and you could have it been sentenced as an adult. म्हणून मग आम्ही काय केलं की we went in for that safe margin of something which says की 16. Okay? आणि मग ज्याला हे दिसायला लागलं की नाही, this boy is walking free, then you had all manner of big things being drummed up की something terrible, something completely terrible is happening. आणि of course म्हणजे the sort of TV generated tamashas that you get in India, त्याच्यात काहीच नसतं ना, त्याच्यात नुआन्स असं काही नसतं. त्याच्यामध्ये फक्त तुम्ही त्याला किती थिएट्रिकल करू शकता, त्याला किती ड्रॅमॅटिक करू शकता, त्याला तुम्ही किती चढवून वाढवून सांगू शकता, बोलू शकता. दॅट्स द ओनली थिंग विच प्लेज अ रोल इन इट. देयर इज नथिंग एल्स विच प्लेज अ रोल इन इट. की त्याच्यामध्ये कसलाही इन्फॉर्म डिबेटला स्पेस नसते, त्याच्यामध्ये कसल्याही प्रकारच्या नुआन्सेसला स्पेस नसते. त्याच्यामध्ये कधी हा प्रश्न विचारला जात नाही की एकंदरीत भारतामध्ये जुवेनाइल क्राईमची कंडिशन काय आहे, किती क्रिमिनल्स आहेत, काय करतात ते लोक. आणि ठरलेलं आहे ना, दॅट इज ऑल्सो व्हॉट मेनका गांधी डिड. When push came to shove and the Rajya Sabha debate had to be culminated, Madam started talking of this की नाही पण तुम्ही पाश्चिमात्य देश बघा, तुम्ही विकसित देशांमध्ये बघा, त्यांच्यामध्ये असं घडतं की तुम्ही 13व्या वर्षी देखील प्रॉसिक्यूट केले जाऊ शकता. आम्ही तर 16 म्हणतोय, ते तर 13व्या वर्षी प्रॉसिक्यूट करतात इफ यू हॅव कमिटेड अ क्राइम. ओके, आता आय व्हेरी सून कम टू दॅट की हे कितना स्टुपिड आर्ग्युमेंट आहे की ते असं करतात म्हणून आपण असं करायला पाहिजे. या आर्ग्युमेंटचे बेसिक फ्लॉज काय, पण दॅट होल थिंग वॉज ड्रम्ड अप. द पेरेंट्स वर ब्रॉट आउट एकदम, and they need not be brought out, they were all over the place, they had always been all over the place. They witnessed the voting on this bill in the Rajya Sabha on the 22nd of December. They sat in the visitors gallery and it was like कि कम से कम इनके जो आंसू है इनको तो हीड करो. ओके, The bill passed in the Lok Sabha for a simple reason because the ruling party had a majority in the Lok Sabha. It need not have grouped any opposition and it need not have gone for the opposition's view कि तुम्हाला काय म्हणायचं. राज्यसभेमध्ये प्रॉब्लेम असा होता की the government doesn't have a majority, so it had to bring the other parties on board. And the most important party that needed to be brought on board was the Congress. And the Congress being the sort of party that it is, Maneka Gandhi once upon a time was a congresswoman. Let's be very clear about it. There's no reason why one should be hiding that under any bushel. She was something called as वो कांग्रेसी है, वो पूरी तरह से कांग्रेसी है. तो जिस तरह से बर्ताव करती है ना, वो क्लासिकल कांग्रेस वालों का बर्ताव ऐसे ही होता है. So there's nothing unusual about this. Okay, she can behave in this manner precisely because at heart she is a Congress. I don't know what does the BJP find virtuous about her, but she goes back to her old instincts and she can definitely appeal to the opposition कि जिसमें the opposition can come on board on this whole issue. आणि मग in that sort of stalled वाला जो पार्लियामेंट का किस्सा था कि नहीं देखो GST नहीं होने देते, ये नहीं होने देते, वो नहीं होने देते, तो उसमें this was the lowest hanging fruit कि जिसमें you could cooperate with the government and show that look we are running the house and we are not into this game of opposition merely for the sake of opposition. Okay, so एकदम simple consensus वाला मामला है, कोई problematic नहीं है. So they voted with the government and the bill was through. Right? Nobody took this factor into consideration that a girl who was dead in that completely heinous a manner in 2012 and who is the only daughter of her parents, who doted on her, who was quite an accomplished person in her own right, is quite a shocking thing for her parents. When you are a parent of a child, you never expect your child to die in this manner. And when you have a child who is dead in this manner, you are obviously completely torn and aghast. आपका mental और psychological condition कुछ ऐसा होता है कि जो बहुत ही disturbing होता है. The parents actually needed psychological care, which unfortunately enough for the last 3 years, मुझे तो कभी नजर नहीं आया कि they had something called a psychological care. They were all over the place throughout the country, talking at seminars, pontificating on this matter. जिधर भी देखो उधर वो थे ही थे. जबकि ऐसी वाली स्थितियों में you actually need to be isolated from larger society and its concerns. You need to reflect on your grief, and you actually need a lot of psychological support to help you come out of it. In any best situation, this would be seen as sheer revenge and nothing more than that. And there's a completely mistaken notion कि ये बिल पास हो जाने के बाद वो लड़का जो है ना वो वापस जेल जा सकता है, जबकि ऐसा नहीं होगा. आर्टिकल 20 बहुत क्लियर है इस बारे में कि आप किसी को भी फॉर द सेम क्राइम ट्वाइस नहीं प्रोसिक्यूट कर सकते हो, एंड डेफिनेटली कैन नॉट प्रोसिक्यूट समबडी with a new law which has been intently made to just prosecute him or her. Equality before law का principle completely gets vitiated. So this is not doable. ये कभी नहीं हो सकता है कि बस आप एक बंदे को prosecute करने के लिए ऐसा कानून बनाओ कि जिसके तहत आप उसको prosecute कर सको. This is not done. But that's a completely misplaced notion if you look at all those debates in the month of December, which made it seem कि अगर ये कानून पास हो गया तो this boy will go back to jail and worse still possibly can be hanged. आ रहा है समझ में? अब प्रॉब्लम क्या है? You are living in a country कि जिसमें let's bring some perspective to it by bringing some figures to it which are quite interesting. I'll just quote a couple of figures to give you a sense of what is it that we are talking around over here. The population of individuals under the age of 18 in India, 43 crores, 53 lakh and something in the year 2013. So we're talking about 43 crore people who can actually be brought potentially under the ambit of this law. Okay, कि जिसकी वजह से वो जो पुराना वाला डिक्टम है ना, law is the tyranny of the few against the many, एकदम क्लियर है यहाँ कि किसका कंसर्न है, किसका कंसर्न एड्रेस करने की कोशिश कर रहा है, हो क्या रहा है यहाँ पे. अच्छा, these 43 crore people are people who, technically speaking, given the fact that they are under 18, they don't have citizenship rights. So they are not voters. They are not a constituency which can be addressed by any politician, and that's the strangest part of this entire debate. Okay, but you can make a law to regulate them. So हम एक ऐसा कानून बना सकते हैं कि जिससे हम इन लोगों को रेगुलेट कर सकें. Okay. The number of individuals under 18 arrested for alleged crimes, alleged involvement in crime in 2013 is 42,566. बात समझ में आ रहा है? Total population under the age of 18 43 करोड़ है. Total लोग जिनको गिरफ्तार किया गया है 2013 में for alleged involvement in crimes 42,000. So what is it that we are talking over here? This is 0.01% of the population of that age group. Okay, let's have another set of figures. Of the 37,90,812 people arrested for crimes under the IPC in 2014, the number of juveniles stands at 42,566, the same figure that I quoted, which is 1.1%. So उनका जो टोटल एज ग्रुप का कोहॉर्ट है उसका पॉपुलेशन 43 करोड़ है, उसमें से उनका संख्या 42,000 है जिन लोगों को गिरफ्तार किया. आईपीसी के तहत क्राइम्स कमिट करने वाले लोगों को जहां पे अरेस्ट किया गया है 2013-14 में, दैट नंबर इज 37 लाख. जिस 37 लाख में ये 42,000 1% बन जाता है, नथिंग मोर देन दैट. In 2003, the total number of persons arrested for IPC crimes was 25,10,000 something, while that of juveniles in the same year was 24,709. That is again 1%. So over a period of 10 years between 2003 to 2013, the number of juveniles as a percentage of people who have been arrested for crimes under the IPC stays at 1 or 1.1%. It doesn't go beyond that. Is this a sign of a country in which people have gone berserk? तो मुझे तो नहीं लगता है. या तो आप डेटा चेंज करो to prove कि there is some trouble on your hands, and if you stay with this data, then there is some trouble in terms of the way in which you are framing the debate. So 1% है जो 1.1% बना है, which in statistical terms is hardly an increase. बात सही है? अब let's go for another set of data. In order to understand the contribution of criminals to the crime growth in India, it is necessary to look at the absolute numbers. Only 38,565 crimes involving juveniles against a total of 72,29,000 crimes in the country in 2014. That means only 0.5% of all crimes in the country in that year involved what is called as juveniles. Okay, so this is one set. Now ये जो specific crime था, let's go for even that, कि ये वाला crime कितना है. The incidence of rape by children as a percentage of the total number of rapes went up from 2.9% in 2003 to 4.4% in 2013. Now this sounds something big. वो पहला वाला जो figures मैंने quote किया वो 1% का 1.1% दिखा रहा है, पर ये rape वाला figure जो है ये बहुत interesting है. 2003 में आपका incidence of rape by children as a percentage of the total number of rapes was 2.9%, and in 2013 this goes up to 4.4%. Okay, so obviously there's a reason to be concerned कि कुछ तो हो रहा है यहाँ पे, कुछ तो बहुत terrible हो रहा है कि like from general crime category 1 to 1.1% जा रहा है, पर rape as a category of crimes is moving up from 2.9% to 4.4%. Now let's understand in a couple of minutes ki what exactly is at play over here. But before that, just let's go back to another very interesting cohort. In 2014, 1,488 persons in the 16 to 18 group, 16 to 18, were apprehended for rape, and 844 were apprehended for murder. These are all India figures. These are all figures which are coming from the NCRB. ये कहीं और से नहीं आ रहा है, ये एनसीआरबी से आ रहा है. एनसीआरबी जितने एफआईआर रजिस्टर किए जाते हैं उनका डेटा कलेक्ट करता है. सो आप ये कह सकते हो, और एनीवन कैन से दिस, कि there are a number of crimes which happen in this country which are not exactly registered, कि इसका कोई FIR नहीं बनता है, कि जो crimes इस figure में कभी कोट ही नहीं किए जाएंगे या जो crimes कभी इसमें reflect ही नहीं होंगे, okay? पर that is fine. That for the purpose of argument is a definitely strong argument and one can definitely accept it and there's no doubt about it. But what has been reported and recorded also needs to be sort of whittled through and gone through. उसका भी तो कोई एक significance है. तो अब 16 to 18 वाला जो एज ग्रुप है कि जिस एज ग्रुप को ये लॉ प्रोसिक्यूट करेगा, उनकी केस में क्या हो रहा है देखिए. Is he dying? Good. In 2014, 1,488 persons in the 16 to 18 age group were apprehended for rape and 844 were apprehended for murder. To set this in context, the total number of persons arrested for rape and murder in 2014 was 48,193 for rape and 69,320 for murder. कि जिसमें juveniles were 1,488 and 844. So 2014 में total people arrested in India for rape is 48,193, जिसमें से juveniles in the 16 to 18 का age group is 1,488. 69,000 people have been arrested for murder, जिसमें juveniles are 844. So I hope कि like figures के तौर पे ये clear है कि like where exactly are we located and what are our concerns for all of this. Juveniles were allegedly involved in 1.2% of murders and 3.08% of rapes. Okay, and again that same thing stands कि nobody should be in any sort of a situation worried about this कि rape वाला मामला जो है वो बहुत serious मामला है कि आप 2.3 से लेके 4.4 तक का बात कर रहे हो और हर साल ये फिगर जो है ये आपको एक इंक्रीज दिखा रहा है. उसका एक वजह है, वो वजह ये है कि there is something that is called as, let me quote it right, Protection of Children from Sexual Offences Act of 2012, which says that the age of consent for sex has been increased from 16 to 18. So वो जो पहला वाला फिगर जो मैंने कोट किया कि आपका टोटल रेप्स 2003 में 2.3 था कि जिसमें juveniles were involved, जो 2014 में 4.4 होता है. पर along the way, the one change which has happened is the Sexual Offences Act of 2012 says the age of consent now is 18 and not 16. So when it makes the age of consent 18, automatically a range of sexual acts now get classified as rape. This is getting through. So where is that increased number coming from? That increased number is coming from because of the fact that in 2012 you suddenly went about declaring the age of consent 18 है. आणि हा सगळ्यात मोठा फ्रॉड आहे, सगळ्यात मोठा म्हणजे ह्याच्या इतका मोठा फ्रॉड ह्या जगात दुसरा कुठलाही असू शकत नाही. की हे अगदीच बरोबर आहे की वेस्टर्न लीगल सिस्टम्स ज्या आहेत ह्या द अमेरिकन्स टू हॅव अ सिच्युएशन विच इज सो व्हेरी डिफरंट की जे इज कोटेड टाइम एंड अगेन इन द इंडियन लीगल केस. 12 is the age at which you can actually try somebody for a crime which he or she might have committed, which can be a crime committed by an adult. And of course it keeps on varying across the states. 13 is roughly the age as far as the European Union is concerned. Okay. But on this one crime which is called as rape, which is so touchy and which everyone gets so worked up with, European Union का age of consent on an average 13 है. Okay. Austria, Germany, Italy, Portugal have it at 14. France, Greece, Denmark, Czech Republic have it at 15. I'm sorry, on an average it is 16, not 13. So European Union की केस में on an average जो age of consent है वो 16 है. ये ग्रुप ऑफ कंट्रीज एक्सेप्शनल है क्योंकि इनकी केस में ये 14 और 15 होता है. सही बात है. सो प्रॉब्लम ये है कि उनकी केस में यस adolescents can be tried as adult criminals, but there is so much in which they are almost treated as adults. Well, in most European countries, Britain being a classical example, age of voting 16 है, 1/6. I vote when I am 16. अभी ये जो लास्ट पार्लियामेंट का इलेक्शन हुआ, ब्रिटिश पार्लियामेंट का, the youngest MP is this girl called as Mary Black, who comes from Scotland, who became an MP when she was 20. म्हणजे मॅडमचं अजून एक वर्ष राहिलेलं होतं की ज्याच्यामध्ये मॅडम ग्रॅज्युएट होणार होत्या, पण इवन बिफोर गेटिंग ग्रॅज्युएटेड शी वॉज इलेक्टेड एज अ मेंबर ऑफ पार्लियामेंट फ्रॉम द सीट कॉल्ड एज पेसली एंड रेंट्रीशायर, जो स्कॉटलैंड का सीट है. आपकी कंट्री में कैन यू इमेजिन अ मेंबर ऑफ पार्लियामेंट एट 20? And I'm saying physical age, mental age नहीं. mental age नहीं. We are talking of physical age. कि जिनका physical age 20 हो, ऐसे बंदों को आपके पार्लियामेंट में जगह मिलेगा? आप कर सकते हो उनको इलेक्ट? उनका एज ऑफ वोटिंग 16 है, उनका एज ऑफ सेक्स 16 है, उनका एज टू गेट अ लाइसेंस टू ड्राइव इज 15 or 16. They can start drinking at 14 or 15. So obviously one shouldn't be surprised if when they go about committing a crime, they are referred to a criminal system ki jisme you would be tried as if you are an adult, when exactly speaking your certificate says you are barely 14 or 15. One can understand that in that case, na? In the great state that is called as Maharashtra, a lovely district that is known as Wardha, age of drinking 30 hai. 30. बाप के पावन स्पर्श से पुनीत भूमि है ना, तो 30 है. धन बाप उनके कि उनको पीने तो देते हैं. Unlike गुजरात where बाप was born, कम ठीक है भाई, 30 के बाद पी. वहाँ तो बहुत सारा प्रॉब्लम है ना. Wait, Gujaratis do drink, there's no problem about that, but officially are not supposed to drink. So आप सोचो, your age of marriage is 21, your age of voting is 18, your age at which you can start drinking is 21, and then when you commit a crime you can possibly be tried when you are 16. So I don't know, इसमें कोई consistency नहीं है. जबकि उनकी legal system जो है ना, जो कोर्ट की गई थी बहुत मोहब्बत के साथ, when this debate happened in parliament, have a lot of consistency, wherein a lot many things are done by youngsters when they are very very young. So I don't know, हमारे केस में तो इसमें से कुछ भी नहीं हो रहा है. बस गुनाह किया 16 में तो you would be tried as an adult by a board which is going to sit on me and decide ki whether I can be tried as an adult or as a child, and which is going to take into consideration whether I committed the crime with an adult-like mind or a childish mind. The very idea is childish. Very idea. So I don't know, like how does one look at all of this? This is quite terrible, and it's like quite disturbing. Ki a country at this time and age can actually think in terms of doing this sort of a business. आणि इतक्या आनंदाने. Okay. Now there's one small thing जो भी I should put on record and we should be talking about it because that is very very interesting. The Apprentice Act of 1815 was the first piece of legislation that dealt with children in conflict with law. So there's this terminology which is used as JCL, juveniles in conflict with law. Now look at it, very interesting, yeah? The act allowed courts to treat children who had committed petty offences as apprentices instead of sending them to prison. आणि सगळा NCRB डेटा बहुत क्लियर है इस बारे में. The largest number of crimes which are committed by children or by JCLs, juveniles in conflict with law, relate with what is called as property. Forced trespassing, forced entries, thefts, burglaries. ये इनका संख्या जो है वो सबसे ज्यादा है as compared to something called as rape or assault with the intent of rape, कि जो मुश्किल से 10% भी नहीं टोटल अप करता है. पर ये जो बाकी सब क्राइम्स है, they take the cake away by almost having 45 to 50% of juveniles committing the crime in that for these purposes. So approximately 50% आपका juvenile जो crime commit कर रहा है वो क्राइम थेफ्ट से रिलेटेड है, वो क्राइम किसी ना किसी किस्म की चोरी चकारी से रिलेटेड है, वो क्राइम किसी ना किसी किस्म की ट्रेसपासिंग से रिलेटेड है जिसमें इंटेंट चोरी है. और ये वाला जो कैटेगरी है which has worked up people so much and has made them feel कि कुछ हो रहा है यहाँ पे. So one is rape and one is assault with the intent of rape. The 10% भी क्रॉस नहीं करता है, 10% of the total. And फिर भी this is like placed right at the center of everything. And वो 50 वाला जो प्रॉपर्टी से रिलेट करेगा वो प्रॉब्लमेटिक है ना, क्योंकि प्रॉपर्टी से रिलेट करेगा तो जिसका मतलब बहुत सीधा है कि क्राइम करने वाला बंदा जो है comes from the poorest sections of society and that is exactly what is proven again by the figures. In most of the cases फैमिली का एनुअल इनकम मुश्किल से 50,000 रुपया है. पर जो सीरियस ऑफेंस है जो ज्यादातर वक्त होता रहता है, हाँ, उसके बारे में बात नहीं करना है. That has to be shoved under the carpet. Don't talk about it. Talk about something which is more fancy. Something which is not at all the centerpiece of things. So एकदम fancy वाला जो केस है कि like there is something called as rape, there is something called as assault with the intent of rape, उसके बारे में बात करो. ये जो बड़ा वाला मामला है, क्योंकि robbery, theft, acquiring somebody else's property, wealth, money, whatever it is basically a crime which is socio-economic in nature, जो उसकी socio-economic status से ताल्लुक रखता है. Okay, when you are that young and you have grown up in that sort of situation of poverty and want, and especially in a world wherein you look around you in terms of things which whet your aspirations, which make you feel like there's something that needs to be acquired. आपका पूरा popular culture जो है in terms of films, in terms of everything, is about something which says कि acquisition गलत नहीं है. You should acquire, you should have. Having material comforts in life, having a certain sort of materiality in life is a very objective of life. घर असलं पाहिजे, कार असली पाहिजे, गोष्टी असल्या पाहिजेत. कारण जोपर्यंत ह्या वस्तू नसणार तोपर्यंत असं कधीच वाटणार नाही की यू हॅव अक्वायर्ड समथिंग. मीनिंग, स्टेटस and a certain idea of honor is associated with acquisition. अच्छा, born in a family की जिसका average annual income 50,000 है, you are obviously not in a position to acquire anything. अब रितसर मार्गाने जर म्हटलं की बाबा नाही वर्षाचं उत्पन्न 50,000 कुटुंबाचं आहे, त्या स्थितीमध्ये या ज्या काही सगळ्या गोष्टी दिसतात त्या येतात, त्या 70% डिस्काउंट येतात, 80% डिस्काउंट, बरोबर, सगळं बरोबर आहे. पण त्या डिस्काउंटच्या नंतर पण काहीतरी किंमत असते ना. म्हणजे 80% डिस्काउंट झाल्याच्या नंतर वस्तू फुकट नाही ना बनत. 80% डिस्काउंट झाल्याच्या नंतर देखील वस्तूला काहीतरी किंमत आहे का नाही. जर माझं वार्षिक उत्पन्न 50,000 असेल, हाऊ कॅन आय अफोर्ड सच थिंग्स? आय एम यंग. Try understanding what the problem is. The problem is you are young, and when you are in that age group, 15, 16, 17, 18, everything is possible. Everything. The world happens because the world is possible. सगळं काही घडू शकतं. A certain reality check kicks in only something like 7 or 8 years after this. Not at that point of time. When you are 15, 16, even in the lowest of the strata, everything is possible. Maybe either ये लोग जैसा करते हैं वैसे आप किसी को लूट सकते हो और चीजों को अक्वायर कर सकते हो. अगर आपका वैसा इरादा नहीं है या आपका उस किस्म का एक तरह से इन्फ्लुएंस अपब्रिंगिंग नहीं है, तो यू वुड वर्क हार्ड. वुड बिलीव कि नहीं, लेट्स आई वर्क हार्ड. And by working hard, I would acquire. 7-8 साल लगते हैं उसके बाद ये समझने में कि आप कितना भी वर्क हार्ड करो कुछ नहीं होने वाला. जो दिखाया गया है उस एड में, उस किस्म का कोई भी चीज आप सारी जिंदगी में नहीं एक्वायर कर सकते. पर वो समझने के लिए 7-8 साल लगते हैं. But when you are 15, when you are 16, this child, 2012 का वो जो दिल्ली गैंग रेप का विक्टिम है, सॉरी वो जो रेपिस्ट है, left home when he was 8. He ran away from home, which is somewhere in Western Uttar Pradesh, when he was barely 8 years old. Came to Delhi, started working. I don't know how many times you have been to such places where you have seen such kids. India has, कोई मुझे नहीं लगता कि इसमें कोई गलत है कि हम लोग इस बात को acknowledge करें कि for all our best efforts of eradicating child labor, we are a country that is steeped in child labor. म्हणजे मला नाही वाटत की दुधाला जाऊन ते ताक लपवायची काही गरज आहे, म्हणजे ताकाला जाऊन भांडं लपवायची काही गरज नाही. आपण कितीही खोटं आपल्याशी बोलत राहिलो, आपण कितीही परस्पर इन द मिडल क्लास कीप ऑन टेलिंग आवरसेल्व्स की नो दॅट सॉर्ट ऑफ थिंग डजंट हॅपन, द वेस्ट डेलिबरेटली पेंट्स दॅट सॉर्ट ऑफ इमेज टू सॉर्ट ऑफ belittle us. You are a country of child labor. Let's acknowledge it. Where some of the worst jobs, some of the least paying jobs, some of the jobs which are tiresome, have a certain sort of frequency to it, a certain sort of regularity, monotony to work, are invariably done by children. आणि आपण जिथं राहतो तिथं तर आपण असं बिलकुलच असूम करू नये की नाही हे मे बी तुम्ही जे म्हणताय हे कदाचित उत्तर प्रदेश बिहारमध्ये होत असेल. Move to any of the signals in Pune. वो सिग्नल पे गाड़ी लग जाता है ना, उसके बाद देखो वो कौन कौन आते हैं आपको क्या क्या बेचने के लिए, फ्रॉम फ्लावर्स एंड डस्टर्स एंड गॉड नोज व्हाट ऑल. लुक एट हाउ यंग दे आर और हाउ ओल्ड दे आर. आपण ना उल्लू बनाने की काही गरज नाही. वी आर अ कंट्री वेयर इन चाइल्ड लेबर प्रीडोमिनेट्स एवरीथिंग. इट्स ऑल ओवर द प्लेस. And most of the time these people work as part of some units, either of family or of kin, और कुछ ना कुछ तो भी आपका गांव का पहचान है, some sort of kin unit of affinity और kinship. तो लोग काम करते हैं इस उम्मीद के साथ कि पैसा मिलेगा, कुछ ना कुछ तो बनेगा जिंदगी में. शुरू करने के बाद एक 8-10 साल लगते हैं इस बात को रियलाइज करने में कि आप लाख कोशिश करो आप नहीं पा सकते हो उस सब को. ये कभी नहीं होना है. At times cynicism steps in. Most of the time the monotony of work now is such that you can't break it, so you give in to it, because at the end of the day at least there is the reward of a monthly pay. मी जाणवतं की हे चूक आहे, ह्याच्यातनं काही होणार नाहीये. आपण किती जरी प्रयत्न केला तरी देखील आपण तसलं काहीच बनणार नाहीये. जसं त्या जाहिरातीत दिसतं, चित्रात दिसतं, तसलं काही आपल्याबद्दल होणार नाही. सो या तो यू बिकम cynical about things, most of the time you fall in line, and a rare number of cases you take to a life of phenomenal crime, hoping ki all that was required was a certain sort of gut instinct कि crime comes from a certain sort of an idea which says कि कोशिश करना है. आपने अगर कोशिश किया कि जिस कोशिश के लिए आपने वो willingness और एक courage दिखाया तो बात हो सकता है. ये बात सही है कि करने वाला बहुत बार इस बारे में बहुत क्लियर है कि शायद ऐसा करने के बाद यू वुड बी अरेस्टेड एंड प्रोसिक्यूटेड. लोग मारेंगे, लोग पीटेंगे, पकड़े जाओगे, पुलिस आपको इल ट्रीट करेगी, शायद आपकी कोई जमानत नहीं करेगा. If you look at the stories which have been generated across the country of people who are juveniles and who have been arrested for crimes, most of the stories are very similar in nature. जोपर्यंत तुम्ही अटक होत नाही, जोपर्यंत तुम्हाला ॲप्रिहेंड केलं जात नाही, तोपर्यंत द वर्ल्ड इज अ डिफरंट प्लेस. द मिनिट यू आर ॲप्रिहेंडेड, एव्हरीबडी हू न्यू यू इज सॉर्ट ऑफ फार अवे फ्रॉम. द लोअर डाउन इन द सोशल ऑर्डर यू आर, द मोर अ पॉसिबिलिटी यू विल ऑल बी बाय योरसेल्फ. कोई नहीं आएगा, कोई आपको बचाएगा नहीं, कोई कुछ नहीं करेगा, क्योंकि उनका रोजमर्रा का जिंदगी का प्रॉब्लम जो है वो कुछ इतना पेचीदा है कि जिसमें दे कांट स्पेयर टाइम फॉर. So all that you will be left with is you fend for yourself. कित्येकदा खूप क्लिअरली माहिती असतं की हे असं आपल्याबद्दल होऊ शकतं, ह्याच्यामध्ये सगळ्या प्रकारची रिस्क आहे, पण there is something in the situation which makes you feel कि at least let me try it. मे बी बाकी सबके साथ ऐसा हुआ, मेरे साथ नहीं होगा. आखिर उम्मीद पे दुनिया कायम है. In the end of the day उम्मीद नाम का कोई चीज होता है नहीं होता है. The more hopeless you are, the more strong hopes you have. जितना आपका एक्चुअल कंडीशन ज्यादा होपलेस है, उतनी स्ट्रॉन्ग उम्मीद होती है. The more well off you are, you would be realistic. नाही एवढ्या इन्व्हेस्टमेंट वरती 1.5% पण रिटर्न येणार. तुला ऑलरेडी तुझ्या बाकीच्या रिटर्न्स मधनं, तुझ्या बाकीच्या इन्व्हेस्टमेंट मधनं 10% मिळत आहे. त्याच्यामुळे ह्याच्याबद्दल एक रिअलिस्टिक चेक असण्याला की नाही ह्याच्यातनं 1.5% पण येणार, इट्स पॉसिबल. कुछ भी नहीं है, वो क्या करेगा, वो तो इस बारे में स्ट्रॉन्ग उम्मीद करेगा ही ना कि लाइक यस देयर इज समथिंग दैट आई कैन डू आउट ऑफ दिस सिचुएशन, आई कैन गेट इट डन. Juvenile crime, interestingly enough, is a phenomena of डीपनिंग मोड्स ऑफ कॅपिटलिझम, की ज्या ज्या स्टेजेसला भांडवली व्यवस्था ही घट्ट पाय रोवायला लागते, विस्तृत व्हायला लागते, त्या वेळेला इन ऑल द कंट्रीज अक्रॉस द वर्ल्ड ऑब्झर्व्ड फिनॉमिना इज समथिंग कॉल्ड अ जुवेनाइल क्राइम. A certain sort of an increase in juvenile crime is एकदम perceptible. So जसं जसं तुमच्या आयुष्याची वेगवेगळ्या प्रकारचे आयाम, वेगवेगळ्या प्रकारचं जगणं हे ह्या भांडवली मॉनिटायझिंगचा भाग होत चाललेला आहे, ओके, तसं तसं द ओल्ड बॉन्ड्स ऑफ कम्युनिटी मीनिंग नो लॉंगर आर इनफ. Not that they are not there, they are not enough. That calls in for a renegotiation of everything. That calls in for situations की like huge amount of migration, की नाही आपण जिथं आहोत तिथं आपलं काही होऊ शकत नाही. You are not living something that is unusual. What we are living in our case in India or in Maharashtra or all such places throughout the country is something that the British and the Americans have lived through in the 17th and the 18th centuries. So hey, huge rates of migration, hey, huge amount of displacement, this complete breakdown of community life and living, this renegotiation of life and living through something that is called as complete monetization of all relationships. So they have lived through all of this. काही नवीन घडत नाहीये इथे. आणि याचा एक इनव्हेरिएबल अशा प्रकारचा आउटकम जो असतो इज समथिंग दॅट इज कॉल्ड अ जुवेनाइल क्राइम. इनव्हेरिएबली घडतं. कारण नाव द मायग्रंट फॅमिली, आता ह्या दिल्ली गँग रेप केस मध्ये इफ यू आय डोंट नो वेदर यू हॅव हाऊ स्ट्रॉंग मेमरीज यू हॅव ऑफ इट, ऑल द रेपिस्ट्स आर मायग्रंट्स. ऑल, एकही जण त्याच्यामध्ये नेटिव्ह टू दिल्ली नाहीये. ते सगळेच्या सगळे जण कुठल्या ना कुठल्या तरी राजस्थान, उत्तर प्रदेश, बिहार, इन तमाम इलाकों में से वो माइग्रेंट्स है. माइग्रेंट्स का प्रॉब्लम क्या होता है, especially in the capitalist thing, they're trying to strike roots, but in the absence of credit, community and influence, striking roots is always an activity which would be equally strongly rebuffed. मग आपण प्रयत्न करतोय, आपला प्रयत्न चालू आहे, तो प्रयत्न कित्येकदा 2-3 पिढ्या चालू राहायला लागतो. पण प्रत्येक स्टेजला there is something that is rebuffing you. There is something that is seeing to it कि you can't strike roots. It's going to be difficult. And most of the time it is difficult because you can't afford the prices at which things are happening. म्हणजे नॉर्मली म्हटलं जातं की बाबा गेल्या वर्षी इथंच आहे आपण, इथंच, पण ह्याच पोझिशन मध्ये ह्या वर्षी राहायला यू विल हॅव टू रन ट्वाइस द स्पीड ॲट विच यू आर रनिंग लास्ट इयर. सो ऑब्वियसली दॅट इज अ सिच्युएशन की ज्याच्यामध्ये जे काही उरले सरले बॉन्ड्स असतील ऑफ फैमिली, ऑफ कम्युनिटी, एफिनिटी, इन्फ्लुएंस, वो भी टूटने लगते हैं. और वो टूटना जो है वो बहुत ज्यादा इंपैक्ट करता है. जो लोग 40s 50s में हैं, they have sort of lived a certain stage of life कि ज्याच्यामध्ये they can be submissive, they can be subordinate, but someone who is 15 or 16 doesn't understand that. So someone who is 15 or 16 always understands the world through a lens called as possibility. The world is possible, the world is yet possible. And if you don't have ways by which you can channelize it in a creative or productive manner, then invariably the creativity and productivity is going to seek a vent through something called as crime. अच्छा, क्राइम का बहुत स्ट्रांग प्रॉब्लम होता है, खास करके अगर मैं किसी और इलाके से आपके इलाके में माइग्रेंट हूँ, तो शायद हमारे एरिया में इस किस्म का एक्टिविटी किया होता तो nobody would have punished us for this. Okay, but in a completely different setting altogether, where I'm not very sure of how exactly would the whole thing work, I time and again get into errant behaviors which get labeled as crime. मग गावाकडे असं फार प्रॉब्लेम नसतो. तुमच्या भिंतीच्या पलीकडचं झाड आहे, त्या झाडाच्या फांद्या रस्त्यावरती आहे, त्याला लागलेली फळं आहेत, आम्ही नेली तोडून. आम्ही रुटीनली असं करतो. आमच्या पुण्यामध्ये पण लोक असं करतात. फक्त प्रॉब्लेम कसा असतो की तुम्ही करणारे कोण आहेत ह्याच्यावरती प्रॉब्लेम. म्हणजे करणारे जर आपल्या ओळखीचे असतील, आपल्या गल्लीतले असतील, आपले शेजारी असतील, तर काय प्रॉब्लेम नसतो. पण करणारा जर ओळखीचा नसेल And maybe he is not doing something that is really harmful. He possibly is helping you with things. But फिर भी the action can be seen as crime. So possibility of falling into a behavior which gets labeled as crime is very strong in this situation. And it calls in for a different approach. The approach being one of reformation, the approach being one of trust, the approach being one of something which says कि जितना उसको लगा कि दुनिया पॉसिबल है, उतना आपने उसका पॉसिबिलिटी का सेंस जिंदा रखना है. अगर आप ऐसा हरकत करोगे तो उसका पॉसिबिलिटी का सेंस इज गोइंग टू डाई. And the sense of the world being possible dying when you are 17 or 18 is a terrible thing. And if you don't leave the hatch open, if you say कि नहीं फिर वो जेल जाएगा, जेल में रहेगा, the bill has a provision for that. The bill actually has a provision. You have committed a crime when you are 17. Okay, you were prosecuted, but given the fact that the Indian justice system works at a certain speed, तर मे बी तुमचा गिल्टी वर्डिक्ट आणि तुमचं सेंटेन्सिंग तुमच्या वयाच्या 21व्या वर्षी आलं. बिल का क्लियर कहना ये है यू वुड अंडरगो द पनिशमेंट एज एन एडल्ट. प्रॉब्लम इज आई कमिटेड द क्राइम व्हेन आई वाज 17. ऑफ कोर्स चेंज फॉर्मेट में वो प्रोविजन है कि नाउ यू कैन बी एक्चुअली ट्राइड एंड प्रोसिक्यूटेड एज समवन हु इज एन एडल्ट. द जेजीबी सेज कि यू हैव टू बी ट्राइड एज एन एडल्ट. पर इन द ओल्ड बिल ये प्रोविजन नहीं था. 2000 के बिल में प्रोविजन ये था कि भाई अगर आपने 17 के एज में क्राइम कमिट किया है तो आपको 17 के एज का ही प्रोसिक्यूशन होगा, which effectively is something that would take a lenient view towards all these types of things. आता ते किती चालू आहेत ते बघा, म्हणजे चालूपणाची हद्द बघा काय. 2012 में the Delhi case happened. The government of India appointed what was known as the J.S. Verma committee. The Verma committee did go through this problem of juvenile offence, and the Verma committee came up with a very strong recommendation which said that we, in our opinion, do not see any reason why this should be rescinded. कि ये 18 का 16 करना है नहीं करना है, ये वर्मा कमेटी ने भी तय किया और उन्होंने कहा कि हमको नहीं लगता है कि ऐसा करना चाहिए. For all things, you stay with that 18. You don't move out of that 18. पण आता म्हणजे वर्मा कमिटी हिला भारत सरकारने अत्यंत सिस्टमॅटिकली करायची टोपली दाखवली. दो we had a lot of noise which was made about the Verma committee, but a number of Verma committee recommendations were clearly thrown out. Here is a man who understands the criminal justice system of the country. He was a Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of India. He has a measured view of how should things be done, legally and judicially speaking. तुम्हाला जेवढा कानून कायदा कळत नाही त्याच्यापेक्षा जास्त कायदा त्या माणसाला कळतो. असा असताना देखील त्याच्यातल्या अनेक रेकमेंडेशन अत्यंत सिस्टमॅटिकली उडवून टाकलेल्या आहेत. One of the most important recommendations which was thrown off was a juvenile recommendation. He clearly said, don't change it. There's no way by which you can change it. It's wrong. आता सगळ्यात महत्त्वाचं कारण काय आहे की at the level of implementation, that was also the problem with the Juvenile Justice Act of 2000, कि उसका level of implementation में problem था, उसका interpretation में problem था. जो problem इस चीज में और intensify होने वाला है क्योंकि इस चीज में बहुत सारी चीजें हैं जो एक तरफ से undefined है. You have not defined as to how would the JGB be appointed. You have not defined as to what does one mean by an adult mind or a childish mind. The minister's definition is as childish as it can be. So mother was tortured, child feels that mother was tortured was bad, so child kills father. And this is childlike. I've never come across anything more hilarious than that. But मेनका गांधी से आप उम्मीद क्या कर सकते हो? Obviously animals का एक problem क्या होता है ना, animals amenable होते हैं ना उस चीज को. I pet you, I take care of you, but then if you bite, then I'm going to slap you. So an animal is always amenable to the human being molding it in a certain way. Treating human beings as animals that need to be petted and occasionally need to be caned if they do wrong. Animal logic है, दूसरा कोई logic नहीं है. ये ऐसा animals के बारे में किया जाता है. and which is terrible, which is seriously terrible. For a simple reason, Karan, for years, for almost 100 odd years, we have been working towards this idea. And I have to admit, I don't even want to open that debate, Karan. It's such a terrible debate all by itself. Maybe unending, but I'll just hint at it because that is equally necessary. What is a child? Is a child a child, or is a child a potentially evolving adult? What exactly is a child? कि जो बच्चा है वो क्या है? वो एक इवॉल्विंग चीज है या वो एक स्टैटिक चीज है? इवॉल्विंग है, ये हमारा नजरिया है. The Menka Gandhi understanding of things is a child is a child and has to stay a child. कुत्रा कुत्रा असतं आणि कुत्रा कुत्रच राहतं. You can pet it, you can sort of like neglect it. I don't know how many of you know that Pavlov वाला केस. कि वो Pavlov वाला जो psychological learning वाला केस है ना, कि जिसमें वो how many people don't know of Pavlov? नहीं? अरे तुम्ही सगळेजण ज्या शिक्षण व्यवस्थांमधून आलेले आहात ना, त्या शिक्षण व्यवस्था work on something called as Pavlovian instinct. So why were you treated the way in which you were treated in school? Is because everybody who taught you in school has learned this Pavlov by heart. You all have throughout your lives been specimens of the Pavlovian variety. It's a very simple idea. It's not very complicated, and I'll make it as simple as possible. Actually, it is very, very complicated. They are complicated in the other sense. Let me tell you that. Pavlov is this Russian psychologist who works with an idea called as conditioned learning. The Pavlovian idea is what is called as conditioned learning. म्हणजे काय करायचं की Pavlov करतो काय तर एक कुत्रा आहे त्या आणि एक ऍक्च्युअल कुत्रा आहे म्हणजे हे कशाचाही मेटाफर नाही काय प्रत्यक्ष चतुष्पाद प्राणी आहे श्वान नावाचं हा संस्कृत आमचा Pavlov लय भारी विल कम टू इट तो काय करतो तो त्या कुत्र्याला अशा कंडिशन्स मध्ये ठेवतो की ज्या कंडिशन्स मध्ये ही इज सॉर्ट ऑफ कंडिशन टू समथिंग व्हेरी इंटरेस्टिंग. ही इज केप्ट इन कंप्लीट सेक्लुजन. देयर इज नथिंग अराउंड. अशा एका एकदम कंप्लीट सेक्लुडेड जागेमध्ये त्याला ठेवलेला आहे. दिवसभर काही होत नाही. विशिष्ट वेळांना एक बेल वाजते. बेल वाजल्याच्या नंतर द हॅच ऑफ हिज रूम इज ओपनड अप ऑटोमॅटिकली and he is let out. And what he gets is food. Okay, and he does what a dog does when he sees food, he starts salivating. हे ह्या लेवलला जातं की एका पॉइंटच्या नंतर फूड येत नाही, नुसत्या बेलनी देखील the dog starts salivating. So in the earlier part of this experiment, it so happens that the bell rings, but the bell ringing is followed with food. The bell ringing is followed with a sensory experience called as food, which you can touch, which you can feel, smell, eat. पण एक असा पॉइंट येतो की ज्या पॉइंटला Pavlov त्याला काहीही खायला देत नाही. Pavlov फक्त बेल वाजवत राहतो आणि बेल वाजवल्याने देखील the dog starts salivating. So this is what is used to educate children, wherein the idea is a right balance of reward and punishment is what enables a child to learn. So you've got to, वो instinctive है, आपको उसके सामने वो रखना है कि देख तू अगर ये सीखेगा 2 into 2 is 4, you would be rewarded. The teacher would say you are a good boy. Maybe at a very early age you might actually be given chocolates or something like that. अर्थात आता ते परवडत नाही कारण 45-45 कोटी आकडा झालेला आहे. त्यामुळे आता काय मला नाही वाटत चॉकलेट बिकलेट मिळत असतील, आमच्या लहानपणी मिळायचे. आणि जर का चुकून जरी असा शहाणपणा केला पण 2:2 4 का व्हायला पाहिजे, 2:2 5 का नाही होत, 2:2 3 का नाही होत, मग मार खाल्ला म्हणून चालतो. असं एक तर लिहायचं नाही आणि सगळ्यात महत्वाचं असं मास्तरला बिलकुल विचारायचं नाही. इव्हन 2:2 4 का होतं, 2:2 5 का नाही होऊ शकत, किंवा 2:2 3 का नाही होऊ शकत. तर मग ते साधं असतं, हे 1 हे 2 हे 3 हे 4 2 2 3 4. अरे पण at the end of the day we have assigned these numerals with these types of value placements ना, कि ये 1 है, ये 2 है, ये 3 है, ये 4 है. मैं इसको 4 क्यों नहीं बोल सकता? बोलता ना ये 4 है, ये 3 है, ये शायद 1 है, ये 2 है. असं काही जरी केलं ना, मार खाल्ला म्हणून लागतं. All basic learning is premised on something called as Pavlov. The West gave up Pavlov immediately after the Second World War. Immediately. One of the first things that was identified in Western countries as something that took us to two disasters called as two world wars was Pavlovian learning. This entire idea called as Pavlovian learning, wherein you could discipline entire classrooms and communities to go out and do as master says, is what was seen as completely wrong with the Western system of education, which underpinned something called as Western militarism. वो पॅव्लॉव रितसरपणे मेला सगळ्यांसाठी 1945 मध्ये. पण पॅव्लॉव अजूनही जिवंत आहे in India and China. Pavlov is even today taught in education schools in both India and China. One can understand the Chinese thing. One has a problem with the Indian thing because Pavlov पण शिकवतात आणि थोड्याने रवींद्रनाथ टागोर पण शिकवतात. टागोरांचे शिक्षण विषय विचार आणि Pavlov एकदम, you have got to imbibe Pavlov while you're doing something called as a course in teaching. All creatures which have been created out of that Pavlovian thing. An idea which says that right behaviors need to be rewarded, wrong behaviors need to be punished. Which, do not forget this, has a very clear idea of what exactly does one mean by right and wrong behavior. So right and wrong behavior are not at the spur of the moment. Right and wrong behavior are predetermined. तुमने क्या किया तो आपको पनिश किया जाएगा और आपने क्या किया तो क्या आपको रिवॉर्ड मिलेगा. ये बहुत डेंजरस है. And it's that idea that underpins all of this. Pavlov, oh my God, once he comes into India, he is so happily lapped up by the Indian upper caste. त्यांना इतका आवडतो Pavlov. And Pavlov gives them the tools of understanding and molding entire communities. This is an experiment. I don't know whether you can understand this while I'm saying this as of now. This is an experiment in disciplining citizenship. You are not at freedom to decide कि आपका behavior क्या रहेगा. आप हमेशा याद रखो ये 43 crimes के लिए you can be prosecuted as an adult. You dare not think of something which says नाही पण आपण करून तर बघू. मार खाणार म्हणजे खाणार. Let me see if I have that in front of me. कि what all are those things for which you can be punished? You can be horribly punished for all of that. And म्हणून this is problematic. Juveniles can now be tried as adults for offences under, now look at the whole list. Protection of Children from Sexual Offences Act. Number 1. आणि जो आम्हाला इतका आमच्यासाठी जो इतका महत्त्वाचा ऍक्ट आहे वो 16 का 18 हुआ ना, पेरेंट्स अक्रॉस इंडिया ऑफ अ सर्टन टाइप वर सो हैप्पी. Routine sexual behavior can now be registered in the police station by saying तुम्ही त्याला धरा. What he has done is he has raped my daughter. Whereas what is exactly transacted is something called as a consensual sexual transaction. But it's terrible. It's simply terrible. You have people who have been booked under this who forget 16 वो तो बहुत ही dangerous है. You have people who have been booked under this who are fairly adults. में रूटीन है in India कि intercaste, interlanguage, interreligious, interregion, international, अशा सगळ्या प्रकारच्या ज्या ट्रान्झॅक्शन्स ऑफ पॅशन है can always be booked under this by saying this that what is happening in this case is he has raped her, and that's the reason why this is very serious. It's not wrong. It has been proven by psychological researchers across the world that in the last 25 odd years, on account of the advancement of something called as technology, and on account of something called as the democratization of access to technology, people have started maturing early. ओके, म्हणजे तुम्ही कित्येकदा असं ऐकलं असेल, प्रत्यक्ष ऐकलं असेल किंवा कुणाला तरी बोलताना पाहिलं असेल, बिकॉज दिस ऑल्सो हॅपन्स इन टीव्ही अँड इन फिल्म्स अँड ऑल ऑफ दॅट. आमच्या लहानपणी असं नव्हतं. म्हणजे आजकालच्या पोरांना जे काही कळतं ते आमच्या लहानपणी असं नव्हतं. आणि मग ते आई बापाचं जे काही ॲप्रिहेन्सिव्हनेस असतं की स्मार्टफोन तर घेतलेला आहे पण तो त्याच्यावरती करतोय काय. मी घेतलाय अशासाठी की दिस शुड एनेबल समथिंग कॉल्ड एज लर्निंग, पण इज ही डुईंग समथिंग विच इज नॉट सपोज टू डू, और फॉर दॅट मॅटर ऑफ फॅक्ट नॉट ही कशाला शी. I had recent lovely data which you have that has come out. Indian women are the third largest community across the world that access something called as net-based pornography. Third largest viewing community. येते लक्षात. आणि मी म्हटलं माझा प्रॉब्लेम नाही ना. 1200 वर्षातील सर्वात धर्मवादी सरकार सत्तेत आल्याच्या नंतर साधारणपणे 2 वर्षांसाठी कॉन्सिक्युटिव्हली the one thing that has been rigorously net searched by Indians, which tops all charts, is something called as Sunny Leone. मेरे पास तो फोन भी नहीं है, स्मार्ट तो छोड़ो, मेरे पास कौन से भी टाइप का फोन नहीं है. Highest searches coming out of India come for one single thing that is called as Sunny Leone. This under the most सर्वात धर्मवादी आणि अत्यंत संस्कारशील शासन, आणि 1-2 नाही 1200 वर्षातलं आणि याच्यात आपण एम्बॅरेस होण्यासारखं काही नाहीये. हे असंच घडत राहणार आहे. ते मी तुम्हाला कधीतरी सवडीने नंतर सांगेल की हे असं का घडणार आहे, ते आपण नंतर, ते एका वेगळ्या चर्चेचा विषय, पण हे असंच घडत राहणार आहे. So what is happening in this case is the net has enabled learning, but the net has also enabled so many other things in the name of learning. म्हणजे once upon a time the availability of nude pictures was something that was considered normal if you are pursuing certain knowledge fields like art, architecture and so on and so forth. It's normal, you would have something called as access to nude pictures. You no longer live in that world. You are living in a world in which all of this has become highly democratic. Okay, and she makes a mention to this when she's talking on the floor of the house. She says it in so many words. That technology has enabled people to mature earlier in terms of understanding certain things. Possibly not in terms of understanding the consequences of those things. And as I said, when you are talking about the people who believe that at their age the world is possible, so that case it never stops with only viewing, na? That case it is obvious that the next stage is going to be tried out, and youngsters not just try out something called as sex, they try out everything else. When you try out gardening, you try out going out to places, you try out traveling all on your own. It's very normal to come across situations wherein a perfectly young person कि जिसको देख के आपको ऐसा लगे कि यार ये स्कूल में क्यों नहीं है बच्चा, is traveling all by himself. So you travel out, you do that, you learn cooking, you possibly cook in the kitchen by breaking mama's utensils or destroying things. But you try so many things. आणि ज्याचं ट्रायलचं पूर्ण प्रिन्सिपल काय नेटवरती दिसलेला आहे. तो त्या नेटवर बघायचं ते त्याच्या पद्धतीने करत जायचं. तो सगळं करतात. आता एवढं तर कळायला पाहिजे ना की जर असं घडत असेल तर हे 16 वरनं 18 ला नेणं आणि ह्याला क्राईम असं लेबल करणं हे मूर्ख आहे. आणि मग एवढं कळून देखील जर का तुम्ही असं वागत असताल तर याचा सरळ सरळ अर्थ असा आहे ना की डोक्यामध्ये काहीतरी एक वायरचं कनेक्शन चुकलेलं आहे आपल्या. यू कॅन अंडरस्टँड दिस की द फ्लो ऑफ दीज टाइप्स ऑफ टेक्नॉलॉजीज इज गोइंग टू मूव इन अ सर्टन डायरेक्शन. इट्स गोइंग टू मेक पीपल मोर मटेरियलिस्टिक. It's going to make experiences more transient and temporary. It's going to increase access to practically everything. You can't say this that बाळा ह्याच्याबरोबर खेळू नये, हे लहान मुलांनी खेळण्याची वस्तू नसते. बाळ कदाचित तुम्हाला असं सांगायला कमी नाही करणार, पण आपण हे गेले 7 महिने करतोय. हे फक्त तुम्हाला आता लक्षात आलं की मी असं करतोय. गेले 7 महिने कदाचित हेच करतोय. It can be anything. गाणी काही पण असू शकतं. मनाला लावून घेऊ नका. सगळा प्रॉब्लेम तो आहे की हे कळायला पाहिजे ना की असं घडणार आहे. आणि त्याच्यानंतर जर का तुम्ही अशा मूर्खासारखे वागणार असताल तर मग आपण मूर्खच आहोत ना. मूर्ख आणि एक काय त्याला आपण म्हणतो वेंचफुल, डेलिबरेटली विशियस, who believe that the world can be ordered in a certain manner. Irrespective of what you do, you are going to have youngsters doing this. आपको अच्छा लगे, आपको बुरा लगे, पर उसके बाद अगर आप ये करोगे, सबसे बड़ा प्रॉब्लम क्या है? अगर आप ये कहोगे कि जे भी डिसाइड करेगा एडल्ट कौन है और यंगस्टर कौन है, तो हम तो जानते हैं कि जब आप एक ऐसे वाली अथॉरिटी, जेजेबी बोर्ड है, जेजेबी कोर्ट नहीं है, पर जेजेबी का आज तक का एक्सपीरियंस इंडिया में ये है दैट बोर्ड एक्ट्स ऑलमोस्ट लाइक अ कोर्ट. ऑलमोस्ट. वेरी इंटरेस्टिंगली, आई डोंट नो हाउ मेनी ऑफ यू हैव गॉन थ्रू इट. वेरी वेरी इंटरेस्टिंग. परमिट मी टू कोट इट. It's a slightly longer quote, but let me quote it. It's like very interesting. Policemen line up the stretch of the lane from Bahadur Shah Zafar Marg to Firozshah Kotla cricket ground. This is in Delhi, where an India-South Africa test is on. I turn to some policemen for the way to the reform home. This is written by a person called Shishir Tripathi. To some policemen for the way to the reform home, also known as Juvenile Observation Center or Bal Sudhar Grah, which is located somewhere behind the stadium. They are puzzled. As I try to explain my destination, one of them says, "अच्छा, बच्चों की जेल." तो ऐसा बोलो ना. When I tell Arif Iqbal, in charge of the observation home, about the incident, he pauses for a moment and says, "See, this is where the problem lies. This is a problem of perception. We can call these children juveniles in conflict with law, and this place as an observation home, and refrain from using words like accused, convicts and jail. But little can change until society sees them as different from adults accused of crime." Or you can change the words in terms of किसका vernacularization आप जिस तरह से करना चाहो आप करो throughout India. The experience is the same. Reform home है, हाँ, पर उसको जिस तरह से रखा जाता है, अच्छा वो भी सुन लो. There's something called as the Integrated Child Protection Scheme, under which juveniles in conflict with law are supposed to be taken care of by the government and are supposed to be like trained for some useful occupation, reintegrated with society and all of that. मी त्यांना तिथं टाकल्यानंतर काय केलं जातं की त्यांना बाबा सुधारण्याची संधी दिली जाते. सगळ्या भारतासाठीचं 2013-14चं याचं बजेट 402 कोटी रुपये. Can you imagine how serious are we about something as serious as this, which can make or break an individual for life? वो क्रिमिनल नहीं है. आपने बस ये तय करना है कि क्या वो इस सिस्टम में जाए या उस सिस्टम में जाए. अच्छा, जब तक ये लॉ नहीं आया तब तक तो आपका मैंडेट बहुत क्लियर था. If he is under 18, you are supposed to take care of him. You are supposed to provide for him, look after him, teach him some skill. Most of the time the skills taught are so hilarious. weaving baskets, gardening, making candles, book binding, ज्या अजूनही skills म्हणून impart केल्या जातात, अजूनही. I don't know who uses candles in a country wherein everybody is supposed to be living with electricity in a couple of years from now. पण अजूनही the idea is कि candles. अच्छा, जो लोग अंधेरे में हैं वो लोग कैंडल्स का इस्तेमाल नहीं करते हैं, जो लोग लाइट में बैठे हैं वो कैंडल लग के खाना खाते हैं. समझने की कोशिश करो, हमारे देश में जो लोग एक्चुअली अंधेरे में है कि लाइक दे आर पीपल हु हैव नॉट येट बीन एक्सेस्ड बाय समथिंग कॉल्ड एज द इलेक्ट्रिफिकेशन स्कीम्स, ते लोक घरी मेणबत्त्या लावत काय नाही. म्हणजे तो त्या प्रकारचा घनदाट अंधकार जो आहे ना तो मेणबत्तीने नाही कुठे जाऊ शकत. मेणबत्त्या आपण शहरामध्ये लावतो, वर लाईट खाली मेणबत्ती आणि खायचं. आपण डेव्हलप्ड आहे ना, डेव्हलप असतं म्हणजे काय असतं, वर लाईट असते खाली मेणबत्ती असते. याला उपयुक्त ज्ञान देणं असं म्हणतात. त्याच्यानंतर या मुलांना एक विशिष्ट अशा प्रकारची रक्कम देऊन त्यांना एका अर्थाने ज्या पॉइंटला सोडायची वेळ येते त्या पॉइंटला दे आर सॉर्ट ऑफ रिइंटिग्रेटेड इनटू सोसायटी. मोस्ट ऑफ द टाइम, बाय that time they have lost everybody in society in terms of friends, family and everything. Nobody is interested in them, nobody is interested in even taking them back. And I don't know if you had heard about this boy's mother who was traced by a couple of newspapers in that place in Uttar Pradesh, wherein that woman is a TB patient and her permanent concern in life is where is she going to get TB medicines at affordable prices. She is least worried about this कि हा मुलगा सुटणार आहे, ह्या मुलाचं काय होणार आहे. आणि आम्हाला टीव्ही वरती बसून हा अजून एक एक्स्ट्रा पॉइंट मिळतो, बघा हे लोक असे असतात. हो, पण लोक असेच असतात, म्हणजे त्याच्यात काही प्रॉब्लेम नसतो. People have a very different understanding of what one means by kin and family at different levels of society. ते काही कॉमन एक्सपिरियन्स नसतो सगळ्यांचा फॅमिलीचा. सो काही लोक असे असतात, काही लोकांच्या फॅमिलीच्या असेच असतात. आणि तुमच्या ज्या काही आहेत त्या ह्याच्यापेक्षा सुपिरियर आहेत, हा तुमचा भ्रम आहे, हे काय वास्तव नाहीये. It's just an illusion at your end कि you feel that what you are living in is a much better family as compared to this, but the mother is just unconcerned about the fact कि your rapist son is going to be released and is more worried about this कि next round of TB medicines कहाँ से आने वाला है. I don't know how do you look at this. You've got to acknowledge the fact you have a problem on your hand, and a problem which cannot be resolved so easily. A problem which calls in for investments, a problem which calls in for interest, a problem which calls in for a lot of care while you are handling it. Now, idea is यहाँ लोग adult jails में अगर आपने उसको रखा, वो adult criminals के साथ बड़ा होगा. He's going to be easily influenced and swayed by them. He's going to take into their sort of lifestyles. Half the time they are abused in most of such places. But the general societal understanding is कि ये लोग criminals हैं. And madam is happy about this कि हाँ हाँ ते criminals आहेत, त्याचा काही problem नाही, ते criminals आहेत. You need not be worried about this. अच्छा, one thing let me make it clear before I move on because this is very interesting. India ratified the United Nations Convention on Rights of Child on the 11th of December 1992. कि जिसके तहत ये strong insistence है कि 18 is the right age at which you have got to try somebody as a criminal. You cannot try anybody under 18 for whatever he or she has done. You have signed up to this. और उसके बाद ऑफ कोर्स सगळे युनायटेड नेशन्स कन्व्हेन्शन्स जसे असतात तसा हा कन्व्हेन्शन देखील त्या प्रकारच्या एक्सेप्शन्स ठेवतो फॉर व्हॉट इज कॉल्ड एज नॅशनल लॉ अँड द स्टेट पार्टीज टू डिसाइड की बाबा याच्यामध्ये हाऊ डू यू वर्क युअर वे. पण व्हॉट इट सेज इज की यू हॅव गॉट टू एक्सेप्ट द फॅक्ट की 18 इज द राईट एज. ओके, व्हेरी इंटरेस्टिंगली जे सांगितलं जात नाही ज्याच्याबद्दल कधीच बोललं जात नाही, पण आय डिड ड्रॉप आउट दॅट. नाही, एक मिनिट लेट मी गो बॅक टू. तो एक अत्यंत महत्त्वाचा मुद्दा तो असा ड्रॉप आउट करून चालणार. Under the 2000 December वाला Act, 15 का Act, juveniles can now be tried for as adults for offences under the Protection of Children from Sexual Offences Act, the Narcotics, Drugs and Psychotropic Substances Act, the Terrorist and Disruptive Activities Act, the Maharashtra Control of Organized Crime Act, and the Prevention of Terrorism Act. So you can effectively try anybody under any of these laws. आया समझ में? अब ये बहुत ही problematic है for a simple reason because this leaves it to the board to decide whether you are in contravention of anything of this. And a board जो कुछ भी कर सकता है, such types of people are very funny when they go about doing this. एक छोटा problem in all of this, a disturbing factor in the run-up to the passage of the bill, that's this bill that we are talking about, was a series of erroneous and unsubstantiated statements that had appeared in the print media as well as in television debates, more so in the television debates. This was carried over to Parliament as well. Even parliamentarians started talking about this. For example, there is something called as the minimum age of criminal responsibility. Has been continuously conflated with upper age of juvenility. The former, that is a minimum age of criminal responsibility, is the age below which a person lacks the capacity to commit a crime, whereas the upper age of juvenility is the age above which an accused person can be subjected to the adult system of prosecution and punishment. The United Nations Convention on Child Rights has stated that the minimum age of criminal responsibility should not be lower than 12. Come whatever happens, it should never be taken down than 12. Can you imagine in India the minimum age of criminal responsibility is 7? Neither did the 2000 Act change this, nor has this act gone about changing it. Minimum age of criminal responsibility, a age below which, as I said, a person lacks the capacity to commit a crime. हमारी केस में legally defined 7 है. We have signed up to the UNCRC कि जिसमें वो age 12 है, और फिर भी हमने 7 नहीं बदला, ना 2000 में बदला, ना 2015 में बदला. Can you imagine under the law what funny things can be done? And yet you feel कि लीगल जो सिस्टम है ना वो स्ट्रेंथ नहीं है उसमें, कि जिसकी वजह से such types of people get in and do whatever they are doing. You don't want to attribute this to anything else. मतलब ही लोक असं का वागतात ह्याची काही दुसरी कारण आहेत का, तर त्या कारणामुळे जायचं नाही, त्याचा विचार पण करायचा नाही. You have got to assume this is not much different from what the British used to do. When the British used to treat certain tribes in India as criminal tribes. की तुला गावात चोरी झाली, पारद्याला धरून आणला. का धरून आणला? कारण तू पारधी आहे. पण मी चोरी नाही केली, तू पारधी आहे का नाही? तू चोरी केली का नाही हा मुद्दा नाही, तू पारधी आहे का नाही हा मुद्दा आहे. सो सिंपल. तू केलं का? तुझं वय 16 आहे का नाही? मग आता तुला धुवायचं. मी गुन्हा केला का नाही? एनसीआरबी का अपना रिकॉर्ड है टू प्रूव दिस दैट इन मोस्ट जुवेनाइल केसेस 30% of cases juveniles have never committed the acts for which they have been alleged for. And when it goes through the legal system, it's proven कि नहीं किया है उसने कुछ भी, पर फिर भी allege किया जाता है. वो allege इसलिए होता है क्योंकि आप जिस किस्म की कंट्री और सोसाइटी में रहते हो उसमें it is almost a given कि the child in that sort of setting of family in caste and patriarchy carries on with all those impressions. हे त्याच्यासारखं झालं. We assume you are a criminal. We are not bothered about this की तू खरंच केलंय का नाही केलंय का. आणि हे एक धाक आहे, धाक. आणि तो धाक त्याच्यासाठीच आहे की जसं जसं तुमची ही सिस्टम अधिकाधिक कॅपिटलिस्ट व्हायला लागते ना, तसं तसं ते लूपहोल्स ओपन अप व्हायला लागतात की ज्याच्यामध्ये फिजिकल लेबर कौन करेगा? Transitional capital systems invariably require a huge amount of physical labor. And invariably, on account of the monetization and the capitalization of all of this, that large pool of labor is available. तो त्याला तुम्ही डिसिप्लिन कसं करणार? कारण वो जितना यंग रहता है, इसमें कहा कि उसका दिमाग एक अलग तरीके से काम करता है. He's not going to take you for your word if you say कि नहीं तू हे दिवसभर असं काम केलं ना महिन्याच्या शेवटी मी तुला 4000 रुपये देणार. तो काही दिवस काम करेल त्याच्यानंतर त्याला स्वाभाविक हे जे पोरग आहे ना हे दिल्ली गँगरेप केस मधलं that youngest juvenile criminal, he imagine try checking this out, त्यांनी त्याचा जॉब किती वेळा बदललेला आहे. He has not stayed steady in any of his jobs, if my memory doesn't go wrong, on an average for not more than 8 months. तो दर 8व्या किंवा 9व्या महिन्याला पळून जातो आणि मोस्ट ऑफ द टाइम तो पळून जातो की ज्याच्यामध्ये ते शेवटच्या महिन्याचा पगार जो आहे ना तो ते परत घ्यायला पण येत नाही. It's possible, it's always possible. When you are that young, you always feel की मी एवढं काम करतो आणि तरी पण तो जे काही सगळ्या प्रकारच्या फुल्यामध्ये मला 4000 रुपये देतो, मला 5000 देतो, मग सारखं शोधत राहतो काहीतरी नवीन. त्या केस मध्ये ना हे अशा प्रकारचे कायदे ऍक्ट व्हेरी परफेक्टली टू रेग्युलेट अँड डिसिप्लिन पीपल. 43 क्राइम्स आहेत अंडर विच आय कॅन बुक यू. आता तू बघ तू कसा वागतो आपण बघू. So people who are vulnerable on account of the operation of the law become more vulnerable. अच्छा, this is terrible as I said की जे त्या बाईला कळतच नाही की बिंडोक सारखी ती काही पण बोलत फिरती. ब्रिटन मध्ये बरोबर आहे ना 16 आहे. अरे पण ब्रिटन मध्ये वोटिंग एज पण 16 आहे ना. So British lawmakers have to factor this in that if their laws created by them affect these people adversely, these people in the next round of voting are going to throw you out. और तुम्हारे लेजिस्लेटर को वो डर नहीं है ना, वो आपको प्रोसिक्यूट 16 पे करेगा पर आप वोट 18 पे करोगे. ब्रिंग डाउन द एज ऑफ वोटिंग ना एकदम. If I can be tried at 16 and made to feel the full force of the law as an adult criminal, then equally as an adult I should be responsible for voting my representative na. हाय का तयार त्याला. If at 16 I am responsible for the crime that I have committed, age of consent भी 16 होना चाहिए ना. It's simple. पण हे न करता ही उलटी अक्कल चालवायची. म्हणजे what you are playing around over here is you are using the full force of the law. You are acting in a tyrannical manner. The law as a tyranny of the few against the many. कसं करायचं? मला नाही माहिती. I don't know. And this is not going to reduce anything. Crime एक गोष्ट कायम लक्षात ठेवायची. बॉटम लाईन आहे, गुन्हा घडतो हा अशासाठी घडत नाही की करणाऱ्याला हे माहित नाहीये की कायद्यात तरतूद काय आहे. गुन्हा करणारा कुणी व्हाईट कॉलर प्रोफेशनल्स ऑफ द अपना जो सहारा वाला है रॉय अँड ऑल ऑफ दॅट व्हरायटी, त्यांना काय माहित नाही. त्यांचे वकील काय त्यांनी गुन्हा केल्यावरती झाले होय. त्यांना माहित नाही की त्यांच्या ऍक्शनचा कॉन्सिक्वेन्स काय असणार आहे. गुन्हा करणारा कधीही ह्या माइंडसेट मध्ये नसतो की बाबा हे आपण केल्याच्या नंतर आपल्याला ह्याच्यामध्ये काय शिक्षा भोगायला लागणार आहे. क्राइम इज ऑलवेज एन एफर्ट मेड टू पुश द लेवल. बघू तरी मी बी आतापर्यंत 1000 जण पकडले गेले पण मी कधीच सुटल. तो आता एवढी वर्ष जेलमध्ये राहून पण तो पण अजून विचार करतो की त्याला सोडणार आहेत कधी ना कधी. To believe in this कि strong laws deter crime is a wrong impression because it doesn't understand as to where does crime originate from. It originates in desperation, it originates in destitution. It doesn't originate in a vacuum where the law is non-existent. नहीं. Laws necessarily do not do this by continuously argue केलं या कायद्याने काय होणार आहे, ह्या लोकांना आहे ना चाप बसणार. They are going to be deterred. They are going to be deterred. IPC 1860 पासून अस्तित्वात आहे. कोण डिटर झाला, फ्रॉम व्हॉट ऑल सॉर्ट ऑफ थिंग्स. करता येतो, बिंदास करता येतो, काही प्रॉब्लेम नसतो. वकील तगडा पाहिजे. वकील चांगला असला ना, काही जरी केलं ना, जेव्हा तर सलमान खान होतो, काही प्रॉब्लेम येत नाही. आदर्श कायद्याच्या राज्याचा आदर्श आहे या देशामधला सलमान खान. काय काय पिक्चर मध्ये आपण लॉ एन्फोर्समेंट म्हणून पण काम करतो. आता काही नसतं. मग व्हॉट इज रिक्वायर्ड, स्टूपिड है ये मानना कि लाइक ये कानून अनपढ़ है. आपका डेटा कह रहा है आपसे कि मोस्ट ऑफ द पीपल इन दैट कैटेगरी 16 to 18 who are doing all these types of things are unlettered, illiterate, are poor. वो नहीं समझते प्रोविजंस ऑफ लॉ एंड एवरीथिंग. मूर्ख हो तुम अगर आपको ऐसा लगता है कि लोग आपका कानून पढ़ के are going to be deterred by it. होणार फक्त काय, JJB ही एक सब्जेक्टिव्ह बॉडी असल्या कारणाने 16 to 18 मधले सलमान खान सुटणार आहे. और रिच है, वेल ऑफ है, कनेक्टेड है, हाँ पेरेंट्स इन्फ्लुएंशियल है. अहमदाबाद मध्ये जाऊन पतंग उडवता येतो, अशी लोक सुटणार. जी लोक अशा कॅटेगरीत मोडत नाही, गरीब आहे, स्थलांतरित आहे, वर्षाला 50,000 इन्कम आहे, तुम्ही लटकणार. म्हणजे मग इक्वालिटी बिफोर लॉ गेलं का नाही मातीत. इथे इतकं ढळढळीत दिसतंय तुमच्या समोर की द इम्प्लिमेंटेशन ऑफ द लॉ इन दिस कंट्री इज सो बायस्ड अँड सब्जेक्टिव्ह. You add on to that subjectivity by coming up with an institution called as the JJB. Profound, simply profound. ते जे काही ते फ्रेंच रॉयल्सच्या बद्दल बोललं जायचं ना, ते तिच्याबद्दल एकदम लागू होतं. She neither forgets nor forgives. She doesn't understand. Incapable of understanding. They always see power as some sort of game, which has to be exercised to merely feel it that you have it. But as I said, I don't believe in this that the Supreme Court is going to behave in any different manner. The reason being, there's a September 2015 ka judgment of the Supreme Court which says that the Juvenile Justice Act really needs to be taken a look at by the states of India. You seriously need to reconsider this. Is it possible to amend it in a manner wherein you can use the full force of the law against what are called as juveniles in conflict with law? Now the problem is that is one section of your population which should be sheltered as much as is possible from the full fury of the law. It's one section which is permanently at the risk of it, especially in a deeply stratified and hierarchicalized society like India. The more that they are in conflict with law, the more the possibility that the law is going to tyrannize against them. Where fling with crime ends up becoming a life in crime. I don't know. Seriously, with this I submit it to you. आप लोग बोलो मेरे को कि आपको जो कुछ भी बोलना है.